How He Cut His Stick by M. McDonnell Bodkin. He breathed freely at last, as he lifted the small black Gladstone bag of stout calfskin and set it carefully on the seat of the empty railway carriage close beside him. He lifted the bag with a manifest effort. Yet he was a big, powerfully built young fellow, handsome too, in a way, with straw-coloured hair and moustache, and a round face, placid, honest-looking, but not too clever. His light blue eyes had an anxious, worried look. No wonder, poor chap, he was weighted with a heavy responsibility. That unobtrusive black bag held £5,000 in gold and notes, which he, junior clerk in the famous banking house of Gower and Grant, was taking from the head office in London to a branch 200 miles down the line. The older and more experienced clerk, whose ordinary duty it was to convey the gold, had been taken strangely and suddenly ill at the last moment. "There's Jim Pollock," said the bank manager, looking round for a substitute. "He'll do. He is big enough to knock the head off anyone that interferes with him." So Jim Pollock had the heavy responsibility thrust upon him. The big fellow who would tackle any man in England in a football rush without a thought of fear was as nervous as a 2-year-old child. All the way down to this point his watchful eyes and strong right hand had never left the bag for a moment. But here, at the Eddiscombe Junction, he had got locked in alone to a single first-class carriage, and there was a clear run of 47 miles to the next stoppage. So, with a sigh and shrug of relief, he threw away his anxiety, lay back on the soft seat, lit a pipe, drew a sporting paper from his pocket, and was speedily absorbed in the account of the Rugby International Championship match, for Jim himself was not without hopes of his cap in the near future. The train rattled out of the station and settled down to its smooth, easy stride, a good 50 miles an hour through the open country. Still absorbed in his paper, he did not notice the gleam of 2 stealthy, keen eyes that watched him from the dark shadow under the opposite seat. He did not see that long, lithe, wiry figure uncoil and creep out, silently as a snake, across the floor of the carriage. He saw nothing, and felt nothing till he felt 2 murderous hands clutching at his throat, and a knee crushing his chest in. Jim was strong, but before his sleeping strength had time to waken, he was down on his back on the carriage floor, with a handkerchief soaked in chloroform jammed close to his mouth and nostrils. He struggled desperately for a moment or two, half rose, and almost flung off his clinging assailant. But even as he struggled, the dreamy drug stole strength and sense away. He fell back heavily and lay like a log on the carriage floor. The faithful fellow's last thought, as his senses left him, was, "The gold is gone." It was his first thought, as he awoke with dizzy pain and racked brain from the death-like swoon. The train was still at full speed. The carriage doors were still locked. But the carriage was empty, and the bag was gone. He searched despairingly in the racks, under the seats, all empty. Jim let the window down with a clash and bellowed. The train began to slacken speed and rumble into the station. 6 porters ran together, the station-master following more leisurely, as beseemed his dignity. Speedily a crowd gathered round the door. "I've been robbed," Jim shouted, "of a black bag with £5,000 in it." Then the superintendent pushed his way through the crowd. "Where were you robbed, sir?" he said, with a suspicious look at the dishevelled and excited Jim. "Between this and Eddiscombe Junction." Impossible, sir. There is no stoppage between this and Eddiscombe, and the carriage is empty. I thought it was empty at Eddiscombe, but there must have been a man under the seat. There is no man under the seat now, retorted the superintendent curtly. You had better tell your story to the police. There is a detective on the platform. Jim told his story to the detective, who listened gravely, and told him that he must consider himself in custody, pending inquiries. A telegram was sent to Eddiscombe, and it was found that communication had been stopped. This must have happened quite recently, for the telegram had gone through less than an hour before. The breakage was quickly located, about 9 miles outside Eddiscombe. Some of the wires had been pulled down halfway to the ground, and the insulators smashed to pieces on one of the poles. All round the place the ground was trampled with heavy footprints, which passed through a couple of fields out onto the high road, and were lost. No other clue of any kind was forthcoming. The next day but one, a card with the name Sir Gregory Grant was handed to Dora Myrl as she sat hard at work in the little drawing-room which she called her study. A portly, middle-aged, benevolent gentleman followed the card into the room. "Miss Myrl," he said, extending his hand, "I have heard of you from my friend, Lord Millicent. I have come to entreat your assistance. I am the senior partner of the banking firm of Gower and Grant. You have heard of the railway robbery, I suppose?" "I have heard all the paper had to tell me." "There is little more to tell. I have called on you personally, Miss Myrl, because, personally, I am deeply interested in the case. It is not so much the money, though the amount is, of course, serious, but the honour of the bank is at stake. We have always prided ourselves on treating our clerks well, and heretofore we have reaped the reward. For nearly a century there has not been a single case of fraud or dishonesty amongst them. It is a proud record for our bank, and we should like to keep it unbroken, if possible. Suspicion is heavy on young James Pollock. I want him punished, of course, if he is guilty, but I want him cleared if he is innocent. That's why I came to you." "The police think—" "Oh, they think there can be no doubt about his guilt. They have their theory pat. No one was in the carriage. No one could leave it. Pollock threw out the bag to an accomplice along the line. They even pretend to find the mark in the ground where the heavy bag fell, a few hundred yards nearer to Eddiscombe than where the wires were pulled down." "What has been done?" "They have arrested the lad and sent out the hue and cry for a man with a heavy calfskin bag. That's all. They are quite sure they have caught the principal thief, anyway." "And you?" "I will be frank with you, Miss Myrl. I have my doubts. The case seems conclusive. It is impossible that anybody could have got out of the train at full speed, but I have seen the lad, and I have my doubts." "Can I see him?" "I would be very glad if you did." After 5 minutes' conversation with Jim Pollock, Dora drew Sir Gregory aside. "I think I see my way," she said. "I will undertake the case on one condition." "Any fee that—" "It's not the fee. I never talk of the fee till the case is over. I will undertake the case if you give me Mr. Pollock to help me. Your instinct was right, Sir Gregory. The boy is innocent." There was much grumbling amongst the police when a nolle prosequi was entered on behalf of the bank, and James Pollock was discharged from custody, and it was plainly hinted the Crown would interpose. Meanwhile, Pollock was off by a morning train with Miss Dora Myrl from London to Eddiscombe. He was brimming over with gratitude and devotion. Of course, they talked of the robbery on the way down. "The bag was very heavy, Mr. Pollock?" Dora asked. "I'd sooner carry it 1 mile than 10, Miss Myrl." Yet you are pretty strong, I should think." She touched his protruding biceps professionally with her fingertips, and he coloured to the roots of his hair. "Would you know the man that robbed you if you saw him again?" Dora asked. "Not from Adam. He had his hands on my throat, the chloroform crammed into my mouth before I knew where I was. It was about 9 or 10 miles outside Ediscombe. You believe there was a man, don't you, Miss Myrl? You are about the only person that does. I don't blame them, for how did the chap get out of the train going at the rate of 60 miles an hour? That's what fetches me, 'pon my word," he concluded incoherently. "If I was any other chap, I'd believe myself guilty on the evidence. Can you tell how the trick was done, Miss Myrl?" "That's my secret for the present, Mr. Pollock. But I may tell you this much. When we get to the pretty little town of Ediscombe, I will look out for a stranger with a crooked stick, instead of a black bag." There were 3 hotels in Ediscombe, but Mr. Mark Brown and his sister were hard to please. They tried the 3 in succession, keeping their eyes about them for a stranger with a crooked stick, and spending their leisure time in exploring the town and country on a pair of capital bicycles, which they hired by the week. As Miss Brown, alias Dora Myrl, was going down the stairs of the 3rd hotel one sunshiny afternoon a week after their arrival, she met midway, face to face, a tall, middle-aged man, limping a little, a very little, and leaning on a stout oak stick, with a dark, shiny varnish and a crooked handle. She passed him without a second glance, but that evening she gossiped with the chambermaid, and learned that the stranger was a commercial traveller, Mr. McCrowder, who had been staying some weeks at the hotel, with an occasional run up to London in the train, and run round the country on his bicycle. "A nice, easily pleased, pleasant-spoken gentleman," the chambermaid added, on her own account. Next day, Dora Myrl met the stranger again in the same place on the stairs. Was it her awkwardness or his? As she moved aside to let him pass, her little foot caught in the stick, jerked it from his hand, and sent it clattering down the stairs into the hall. She ran swiftly down the stairs in pursuit, and carried it back with a pretty apology to the owner. But not before she had seen, on the inside of the crook, a deep notch, cutting through the varnish into the wood. At dinner that day, their table adjoined Mr. McCrowder's. Halfway through the meal, she asked Jim to tell her what the hour was, as her watch had stopped. It was a curious request, for she sat facing the clock, and he had to turn round to see it. But Jim turned obediently, and came face to face with Mr. McCrowder, who started and stared at the sight of him, as though he had seen a ghost. Jim stared back stolidly, without a trace of recognition in his face, and Mr. McCrowder, after a moment, resumed his dinner. Then Dora set, or seemed to set and wind her watch, and so the curious little incident closed. That evening Dora played a musical little jingle on the piano in their private sitting-room, touching the notes abstractedly, and apparently deep in thought. Suddenly she closed the piano with a bang. "Mr. Pollock?" "Well, Miss Myrl," said Jim, who had been watching her with the patient, honest, stupid admiration of a big Newfoundland dog. "We will take a ride together on our bicycles tomorrow. I cannot say what hour, but have them ready when I call for them." "Yes, Miss Myrl." "And bring a ball of stout twine in your pocket." "Yes, Miss Myrl." "By the way, have you a revolver?" "Never had such a thing in my life." "Could you use it, if you got it?" "I hardly know the butt from the muzzle, but," modestly, "I can fight a little bit with my fists, if that's any use." "Not the least in this case. An ounce of lead can stop a 14-stone champion." Besides, 1 6-shooter is enough, and I'm not too bad a shot." "You don't mean to say, Miss Myrl, that you—" "I don't mean to say one word more at present, Mr. Pollock. Only have the bicycles ready when I want them, and the twine." Next morning, after an exceptionally early breakfast, Dora took her place with a book in her hand upon a sofa in a bow window of the empty drawing-room that looked out on the street. She kept one eye on her book and the other on the window, from which the steps of the hotel were visible. About 9:30 o'clock, she saw Mr. Macrowder go down the steps, not limping at all, but carrying his bicycle, with a big canvas bicycle bag strapped to the handlebar. In a moment she was down in the hall, where the bicycles stood ready. In another, she and Pollock were in the saddle, sailing swiftly and smoothly along the street, just as the tall figure of Mr. Macrowder was vanishing round a distant corner. "We have got to keep him in sight," Dora whispered to her companion as they sped along. "Or rather, I have got to keep him, and you to keep me in sight. Now, let me go to the front. Hold as far back as you can without losing me, and the moment I wave a white handkerchief, scorch." Pollock nodded and fell back, and in this order, each about half a mile apart, the 3 riders swept out of the town into the open country. The man in front was doing a strong, steady 12 miles an hour, but the roads were good, and Dora kept her distance without an effort, while Pollock held himself back. For a full hour this game of follow my leader was played without a change. Mr. Macrowder had left the town at the opposite direction to the railway, but now he began to wheel round towards the line. Once he glanced behind, and saw only a single girl cycling in the distance on the deserted road. The next time he saw no one, for Dora rode close to the inner curve. They were now a mile or so from the place where the telegraph wires had been broken down, and Dora, who knew the lie of the land, felt sure their little bicycle trip was drawing to a close. The road climbed a long, easy, winding slope, thickly wooded on either side. The man in front put on a spurt. Dora answered it with another, and Pollock, behind, sprinted fiercely, lessening his distance from Dora. The leader crossed the top bend of the slope, turned a sharp curve, and went swiftly down a smooth decline, shaded by the interlacing branches of great trees. Half a mile down at the bottom of the slope, he leapt suddenly from his bicycle, with one quick glance back the way he had come. There was no one in view, for Dora held back at the turn. He ran his bicycle close into the wall on the left-hand side, where a deep trench hid it from the casual passers-by, unstrapped the bag from the handlebar, and clambered over the wall, with an agility that was surprising in one of his apparent age. Dora was just round the corner, in time to see him leap from the top of the wall into the thick wood. At once she drew out and waved her white handkerchief, then settled herself in the saddle and made her bicycle fly through the rush of a sudden wind down the slope. Pollock saw the signal, bent down over his handlebars, and pedalled uphill like the piston rods of a steam engine. The man's bicycle by the roadside was a finger-post for Dora. She, in her turn, overperched the wall as lightly as a bird. Gathering her tailor-made skirt tight around her, she peered and listened intently. She could see nothing, but a little way in front a slight rustling of the branches caught her quick ears. Moving in the underwood, stealthily and silently as a rabbit, she caught a glimpse through the leaves of a dark grey tweed suit, 15 or 20 yards off. A few steps more, and she had a clear view. The man was on his knees. He had drawn a black leather bag from a thick tangle of ferns at the foot of a great old beech tree, and was busy cramming a number of small canvas sacks into his bicycle bag. Dora moved cautiously forward till she stood in a little opening, clear of the undergrowth, free to use her right arm. "Good morning, Mr. Macrowder," she cried sharply. The man started and turned, and saw a girl, half a dozen yards off, standing clear in the sunlight, with a mocking smile on her face. His lips growled out a curse. His right hand left the bags and stole to his side pocket. "Stop that!" The command came clear and sharp. "Throw up your hands!" He looked again. The sunlight glinted on the barrel of a revolver, pointed straight at his head with a steady hand. "Up with your hands, or I fire!" And his hands went up over his head. The next instant Jim Pollock came crashing through the underwood like an elephant through the jungle. He stopped short with a cry of amazement. "Steady," came Dora's quiet voice. "Don't get in my line of fire. Round there to the left. That's the way. Take away his revolver. It is in his right-hand coat pocket. Now, tie his hands." Jim Pollock did his work stolidly, as directed. But while he wound the strong cord round the wrists and arms of Mr. Macrowder, he remembered the railway carriage, and the strangling grip at his throat, and the chloroform, and the disgrace that followed, and if he strained the knots extra tight, it's hard to blame him. "Now," said Dora, "finish his packing." And Jim crammed the remainder of the canvas sacks into the big bicycle bag. "You don't mind the weight?" He gave a delighted grin for an answer, as he swung both bags in his hands. "Get up," said Dora to the thief, and he stumbled to his feet, sulkily. "Walk in front. I mean to take you back to Ediscombe with me." When they got on the side road, Pollock strapped the bicycle bag to his own handlebar. "May I trouble you, Mr. Pollock, to unscrew one of the pedals of this gentleman's bicycle?" said Dora. It was done in a twinkling. "Now, give him a lift up," she said to Jim. "He is going to ride back with one pedal." The abject thief held up his bound wrists imploringly. "Oh, that's all right. I noticed you held the middle of your handlebar from choice coming out. You'll do it from necessity going back. We'll look after you. Don't whine. You've played a bold game and lost the odd trick, and you've got to pay up, that's all." There was a wild sensation in Ediscombe when, in broad noon, the bank thief was brought in, riding on a one-pedalled machine, to the police barrack, and handed into custody. Dora rode on through the cheering crowd to the hotel. A wire brought Sir Gregory Grant down by the afternoon train, and the three dined together that night at his cost, the best dinner and wine the hotel could supply. Sir Gregory was brimming over with delight, like the bubbling champagne in his wine-glass. "Your health, Mr. Pollock," said the banker to the junior clerk. "We will make up in the bank to you for the annoyance you have had. You shall fix your own fee, Miss Myrl, or rather, I'll fix it for you, if you allow me. Shall we say half the salvage? But I'm dying with curiosity to know how you managed to find the money and thief." "It was easy enough when you come to think of it, Sir Gregory. The man would have been a fool to tramp across the country with a black bag full of gold, while the hue and cry was hot on him. His game was to hide it and lie low, and he did so. The sight of Mr. Pollock at the hotel hurried him up, as I hoped it would. That's the whole story." "Oh, that's not all. How did you find the man? How did the man get out of the train, going at the rate of 60 miles an hour? But I suppose I'd best ask that question of Mr. Pollock, who was there." "Don't ask me any questions, sir," said Jim, with a look of profound admiration in Dora's direction. "She played the game off her own bat. All I know is that the chap cut his stick after he had done for me. I cannot in the least tell how." "Will you have pity on my curiosity, Miss Myrl?" "With pleasure, Sir Gregory. You must have noticed, as I did, that where the telegraph was broken down, the line was embanked, and the wires ran quite close to the railway carriage. It was easy for an active man to slip a crooked stick like this." She held up Mr. Macrowder's stick as she spoke, over 2 or 3 of the wires, and so swing himself into the air, clear of the train. The acquired motion would carry him along the wires to the post, and give him a chance of breaking down the insulators. "By Jove! You're right, Miss Myrl. It's quite simple when one comes to think of it. But still, I don't understand how—" "The friction of the wire," Dora went on, in the even tone of a lecturer, "with a man's weight on it, would bite deep into the wood of the stick, like that." Again, she held out the crook of a dark, thick oak stick for Sir Gregory to examine, and he peered at it through his gold spectacles. "The moment I saw that notch," Dora added quietly, "I knew how Mr. Macrowder had cut his stick." You've been listening to a bite-sized audiobook. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, please try the links below, and do click subscribe and hit the bell to hear about future uploads. You may also be interested in becoming a channel member. There are a few options available with various benefits. Click the Join button to find out more. Thank you for listening.